I'm Ryan Glover, and I'm here today with Dr. Melina Abdullah, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, I'm so excited to speak with you today. And I was reading about you, and it says you were born in Oakland. Did you grow up there?
Yeah, born and raised in Oakland, California. Moved here, though I've been in Los Angeles most of my adult life. I moved here for graduate school. So from Oakland to DC for Howard, and then moved to Los Angeles for grad school at USC.
Oakland has like this rich history of civil rights. What was it like growing up in Oakland?
Phenomenal. So I'm of the Panther Cub generation. Some people call it Gen X, but Panther Cub generation if you're from Oakland, which means that I'm the generation that would be the sons and daughters of the Black Panther Party. Right. Of course, we know the Black Panther Party was born in Oakland, California in 1966. So those who were in my generation were raised in the midst of Black struggle, knowing that we don't have to just swallow white supremacy. And we were raised to rebel and demand Black freedom and Black liberation.
Right. I look up to so many people from the Black Panthers movement, Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael. I think that they have this incredible legacy, which is almost tarnished sometimes by people in academia where they try to paint them as something that they were not. Do you see that?
I see kind of reflections on the Black Power movement. And if we kind of define Black Power movement as, I always say 1965 is the kind of pivot year, the transition year between the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. 1965 marking the passage of the Voting Rights Act, but 1965 also drawing that contrast when we saw what happened with the Watts Uprising, right? And so the organizations that were born in that Black Power period, of course, 1965 also marking the assassination of our beloved ancestor, Minister Malcolm X, right? And so when we see organizations that were born out of that, who really inherit a legacy and gained tremendous power from the legacy of Minister Malcolm X and began to say Black Power, you mentioned Kwame Ture, began to say Black Power, there was a concern among those who thought we needed to be civil, right, that they were going about it wrong. And so I think that has traced through in many ways into kind of more academic settings where they're less comfortable talking about demands for Black Power than they are about asks for civil rights. And so I think it's people like us and people who engage and work on the ground, but also who are heirs to the Black Power movement that can lift up why it's necessary to say resistance, 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 organize, 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 and dare to say Black Power.
Definitely. And you talk about being Panther Cub. So activism was something that you learned from a young age. Can you talk about a little bit what that looked like?
Sure. So my parents were actually not members of the Black Panther Party, but they were part of the what we call survival program. So my mother was an elementary school teacher, so she participated in the work that they did on the ground, helping children to read with their homework and with their free breakfast programs. And so I learned from my parents, but I also learned from community. So I went to the only high school in the country at the time with a Black Studies department. So Mr. Navies led that whole department, right? One of my best friends in high school, Dassine, her father was David Hilliard, right? So we all learned a lot in Oakland, even though people, if you've never been to Oakland, you think it's a city, and it is, but it's also a small town. So we always call it the town, right? So it's we're very insular, and we all know each other. And so even though my parents were not actual members of the Black Panther Party, I could glean understandings from my friends' parents or from my parents' friends, right? Yeah.
And it's incredible. You went to an HBCU, Howard University, one of my favorite HBCUs. I think that HBCUs are so important in the Black community. Why did you decide particularly to go to Howard? Because you could have went to probably any educational institution.
I couldn't have, actually.
Really?
So I think it's important. Now people will like try to call you by your titles, and I'm grateful to have earned a PhD, right? But I think it's important also to uplift that my mother, of course, was an educator. She was a brilliant, committed, single mother, and she did everything she could. But I was also raised in East Oakland. So I'm not from the hills. I'm from the flatlands. And I was born at a time where when I came of age, crack cocaine had just hit.
Right.
And so like a lot of people in my neighborhood, I was caught up in kind of the chaos that was plaguing our communities. And I was not a great student. And so even though I went to Berkeley High and Mr. Navy's planted seeds in me, I wound up dropping out of traditional high school.
Really?
Yeah. And so
why did you drop out?
I was searching, I guess. I was school wasn't giving me what I needed. There were a lot of pulls from the streets. You know, I always tell people I've been to jail 8 times, and I've been to jail 8 times for righteous stuff.
Right. That's the difference, right?
But when I was younger, there were additional times that I was arrested and went to jail that were not for righteous things. And, you know, we got to be real about how white supremacy intentionally targets Black communities and Black young people and tries to throw us away. And if I didn't have my mother, if I didn't have my grandparents who lived across the street, if I didn't have my neighborhood, if I didn't have Mr. Navy's, and if I didn't have a Howard University, they would have thrown me away. And I probably, if I were a child now, I wouldn't have gotten away with the stuff I got away with when I was 16, right? There were things that I didn't get caught for. Yeah, I've been arrested a few times as a minor, but there were things I didn't get caught for, right? And I may still be in prison. I didn't kill anybody. Let me be very clear about that. But what I appreciate is that Howard University gave me a chance. Howard University saw a lot in me. And I needed that refuge at that time. So I graduated high school in 1990. And that's the year that my cousin, who was also one of the best friends I'd ever had in my life, Trinice Harper, was killed. And
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you for that. And so it was very difficult for me. And I'd had friends killed. One of my first boyfriends was killed when I was in the 8th grade. And, you know, lots of folks in my neighborhood had been killed. But when it's someone that close to you, and this is community violence, it is devastating, especially as a 17-year-old child. And so I needed a place to run away to. And Howard gave me that. And Howard also saw in me what the school systems didn't see in me, which was that, you know, there was genius in me. And there's genius in all of our children. And so I'm grateful and will be forever indebted to Howard University. And the way that HBCUs get down is a model, and that's what our people need.
Yeah, I was at Howard University on election night. Unfortunately, like, she lost, like, you know, and I think that just like you could feel, like, you know, the tension in the air, like, you know, that Donald Trump was going to be the president. And I hear from you like a story that sounds like so familiar, because I'm from Chicago, and I've experienced some of those like same things of like losing people. And it reminds me of, like, you know, Nipsey Hussle verse when he says in Bigger Than Life, these racial institutions, these racist institutions acting like they're not the reason that we ruthless. I feel like, you know, like how white supremacy has created these conditions, particularly like, you know, in Black communities, and then kind of act like they're not the reason, like, you know, for it.
Right. That's right. That's right. I mean, Pac said the same thing in different
Yeah,
language,
for sure.
right? The hate you give little infants. I don't know if y'all cuss,
Yeah,
but I do
yeah.
usually.
Yeah, of course.
The hate you give little infants fucks everybody. That's what thug life is, right?
Yeah.
So these structures, these infrastructures, these systems are meant as another form of assault on Black people. And, we have to be, that's why we say we're abolitionists, or really, if we want to get to it and be straight up, we're revolutionaries, because we have to transform institutions and build new systems that allow our people to grow and thrive.
So after you drop out of high school, do you eventually get into a GED program, or you go to an adult learning school, or how does that work to you eventually going to Howard?
Yeah. I went straight to, so independent studies was brand new. So I went straight to independent studies. Y'all probably know about it now, but in the 80s and 90s, they didn't know what independent studies was. But essentially what it is you check in once a week. You got a teacher. They give you your books, and the goal is to earn enough so that you could either get your GED or go back and go to regular high school. I went back and went to regular high school my senior year, and wound up graduating from regular high school in 12th grade. That 11th grade year at independent studies, because it was new, it looked like I had a 4.0 in 11th grade.
Okay.
But it was just independent studies. I was basically copying all the answers out the back of the book and walking around and counting that as my PE. And that's what allowed me to apply to Howard and get into Howard because of that structure. Yeah.
And I saw you're an AKA.
I am an AKA. Yes. Alpha
so
Kappa Alpha.
Did you find out I guess when you went to Howard that you could achieve academically?
Yeah. And again, this is why it's so important that we have people who are really grounded and institutions that are grounded. And I'm not saying Howard is perfect,
right,
but I will say that there are so many Black educators at Howard who
right,
are invested in Black folks doing well for the purposes of liberation. So I know we like to use this term Black excellence. Black excellence is really exclusionary in my view, right? It doesn't mean that we don't want to be excellent. We don't want to be great. But what is our greatness for, right? Our greatness needs to be for a collective uplift. And so at Howard, my professor freshman year, freshman English, Mr. Learns, he did not have a PhD, but was the best professor, right? I actually got remediated at Howard. According to what they call the diagnostic test. I didn't learn enough in high school, right? The school system didn't teach me how to write. So when I took the diagnostic test, it was supposed to put me in remedial English, and Mr. Learns, I don't know where he got a British accent because he was from Philadelphia, but he said, "Oh no, you shall not be remediated. You shall meet with me every day during office hours, and I shall teach you to write." And he did.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what you get at Howard is, you have a Mr. Learns, you have a Dr. Adams who passed recently, who was my guide. He was a chair of African American studies, and he's probably the smartest man who walked the face of this earth. And he would just tell me almost from freshman year, he would say, "It's a great life," talking about being a professor. "It's a great life." And he was really luring me into academia. Or Dr. McCormick, who was one of my political science professors, who when I began to do really, really well at Howard. So I went from dropping out of high school to earning straight A's at Howard. And I got into this program called the National Name Exchange, which was about recruiting Black students to graduate school. And I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And the interviewer was Dr. McCormick. And I said, I want to, and by now, Maxine Waters is all over the news and the 92 uprisings that happened in LA. And I'm looking at who we now call Auntie Maxine. And I'm like, I want to be that, right? And so Dr. McCormick said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to law school so I can run for Congress. And I want to be the next Maxine Waters. And he said, no, we got enough Black lawyers. You get a PhD. And so that's what we had at Howard, were people who were guiding us. And I'm talking about the professors, but also we had secretaries and janitors. If it weren't for the janitors, I wouldn't have eaten. It was,
Wow.
my mother didn't have money to send us there, right? To send me and my brother to college. She didn't have money. She was an elementary school teacher, single mama, right? So I'm grateful to Howard. I wound up getting scholarships based on my GPA, but that wasn't enough to feed me or house me. And so, it was the janitors who would come in. I was in student government. They would come knock on the door to the Hughes office and go, "They just finished an event in that room. There's chicken left over." And I would go and get the chicken. Or I remember one week we survived off a chocolate sheet cake, right?
Wow.
And so it was people like that. It was the people who worked in housing who would assign me a room and then say, "We're going to put you with 2 people per room, but we'll see if they show up or not." And I wound up with a room that gave me quiet because of the people like that. It was the workers in DC at Dunkin' Donuts who would say, "Come at 5:00 and we'll give you all the leftovers," right? For free, right? This is what got me through. And so Howard and HBCUs in general, I'm now the mother of 3 children.
Wow. Yeah.
My oldest child just graduated from Howard, right?
Oh, wow.
My
Congratulations.
Thank you. My middle child just finished her freshman year at Southern and in Baton Rouge. And it was the same thing there, right? That the people there made sure that she had what she needed. They knew about, my children have a whole different set of issues because there's security issues because, people are crazy.
For sure.
And my children have been pretty high profile, and the people at Southern made sure, does Amara need anything for her safety? No, we want to keep her in the dorm, not let her move off campus because the campus is too crowded, right? So they're housing people in these apartments, but they don't have the same kind of security protocols as the dorms do, right? And so they make sure that she's okay. The people at Howard make sure that my oldest daughter, that she got the study abroad that she needed to go to South Africa and be enriched. The Spanish department is different because it's grounded in Blackness, right? Black people speak Spanish. And so they wound up becoming a Spanish minor. So anyway, I could go on and on about HBCUs, but I wouldn't send my children anywhere else.
For sure. And I love my experience with HBCUs. And after you graduate from Howard, you go to USC. Mm-hmm. And eventually get your PhD. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I came to USC because there was a brilliant scholar there named Michael Preston, who became an academic father to me. He wrote the book, The New Black Politics, and he's one of the original members of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. He's a giant in our field. And so while I was at Howard, I worked part-time for the graduate school, and the dean of the graduate school at USC was a Black woman named Barbara Solomon. She came and she visited me and she recruited me and then had me meet with Dr. Preston. And Dr. Preston is who got me through USC. NCOB's National Conference of Black Political Scientists made me see that political science is not just these white political scientists who do measures, but the work that we can do can be grounded in how do we empower Black people. And so my dissertation research was on womanist leadership and how do Black women lead and lead differently in a way that's grounded in community.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. And you eventually start Black Lives Matter. You're co-founder. I know there's Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. There's Black Lives Matter Grassroots. Can you explain all that?
So I'm co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, which is the first chapter of Black Lives Matter. And I'm co-founder of Black Lives Matter Grassroots, which is the umbrella that houses all of the chapters, right? All of the chapters that are currently doing work. Black Lives Matter was founded July 13th, 2013, and I was part of the original group that convened to form the movement. But that first meeting was not my idea. So I'm not considered a co-founder of Black Lives Matter. The three people who are considered co-founders are Alicia Garza, who wrote this love letter to Black people on Facebook, and it became like a viral thing. The person here, her name is Patrice Cullors, and
Right.
then there's someone in New York named Opal Tometi. So I wasn't one of those three, but I was one of the original people who made it kind of come to life on the ground. So July 13th, 2013, we're in the streets protesting after Zimmerman is acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. And I'd been organizing with Patrice for a few years at that point around questions of police violence, sheriff's violence. And so on our third day of protest, I got a text from Patrice Cullors that said, meet at St. Elmo Village at 9 p.m. And I had already been in the streets for 3 days with students, with comrades, with my own children. And so I brought them all to her, the community that she was living in, a Black artist community called St. Elmo Village. And there were only about 30 of us. So my students and family and friends and her friends, mostly artists, and we convened. That was the first meeting of Black Lives Matter. There were about 30 people there at St. Elmo Village.
That's incredible. And I love Black Lives Matter. I think they do some incredible work, but I see that people attack them online regularly. I've seen a lot of rappers say negative things, such as Lil Yachty. He recently was accusing Black Lives Matter of being a scam. And I think Patrice Cullors, she takes the brunt of from what I've seen on social media, that criticism, because people say she's misappropriated funds, she bought a mansion or something. Could you speak to just the criticism from Black people who say that Black Lives Matter is a scam?
Sure. So there is a scam. So I want to be straight up about that,
Okay.
that if people are following BLK Lives Matter or the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, the three people who run it are absolute scammers and thieves. So their names are Shalomia Bowers, Cecily Gay, and Dejanay Parker.
Oh,
And I believe in naming names. I believe in not allowing people who stole hundreds of millions of dollars that comes from the blood of Mike Brown, the blood of Trayvon Martin, the blood of Andrew Joseph, the blood of Waukesha Wilson, and the real threats and sweat and tears that have been placed on the backs of organizers like me. I've been swatted, my home with my
Right.
children in it 3 times, right? I've been arrested for Black Lives Matter work 8
Right.
times, right? I've had guns pointed at my chest, white supremacists roll up on me. I've been knocked out in parking lots, right? All of these things have happened to me. And then these 3 thieves swooped in and stole Black Lives Matter. They stole the money, they stole the platforms, and they stole our good name. So there is a scam. So I don't know what Lil Yachty said, but if he said it's a scam, Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation is absolutely a scam. And they're using it, and you should check out these people and their social media accounts. They believe in what they call Black opulence. They believe in taking first class flights and being at, what's the last thing, the chair, her name is Cecily Gay, was at something called Preakness, where she's at some high end. They believe in high end stuff and wearing couture and all of that. That's a scam. That's not what people donated money for.
Were these people though actually members of Black Lives Matter before? How did they hijack the platforms? How did that happen?
So let me say this. What's not a scam is BLM Grassroots.
Right, okay.
So everyone should follow BLM Grassroots. We are over 40 chapters on the ground doing the work that you think of when you think of Black Lives Matter. So there's a young boy who was just killed in Alabama, Jabari Peoples, right?
Mhm.
Who's standing with his family. It's Black Lives Matter Birmingham and Black Lives Matter Alabama, who are part of BLM Grassroots, right? Who's fighting for Erskine Jenkins, a college sophomore who was killed in Lubbock, Texas. It's Black Lives Matter Grassroots. So that is really important work that needs to move forward.
Right.
How did these people get it? That was your question.
I think for like a reasonable person, because I see like the work that you're doing is substantive. And I was like looking at their arguments like before the interview, and I was like, because they're accusing you of being like a COINTELPRO agent, and like, because like, like you're half black and half white, I guess. And like, that is like, their argument.
Well, don't believe everything that you read, especially when it's written by liars. So I wouldn't take anything from, you're talking about something that the thieves wrote on blacklivesmatter.com. So I don't consider myself mixed, right?
Yeah.
They want to tell that story because they want to diminish people.
Right.
I don't believe in mixed race identity, and that's a whole nother conversation.
No, yeah, I get it. Like that kind of like lost me. I was like looking though, just like at their argument to see like the other side, and like, but like now that you explain that, because I think it would be confusing for people, who aren't familiar necessarily like with the work that you're doing. Because I met you at a protest and you were speaking like, very eloquently, by the way.
Thank you.
And you were explaining the difference between Black Lives Matter, Grassroots.
Right. So what happened in 2020 is Black Lives Matter, because we were just one entity, right? And then in 2019, when Patrice stepped back or planned to step back, and so she had actually made an announcement that she was stepping back as of February 2020. We threw a big going away party for her and everything, right? But then George Floyd was killed, and so she came back in. Prior to that, when she was stepping back, the chapters had already decided we didn't like how things were going, so we birthed BLM Grassroots. But then when she came back, we continued to work together, right? In 2020, as we were struggling, what we weren't fully prepared for, because we were 7 years in, so we knew how to move on the ground. We were very fortunate to have a movement to meet the moment in 2020, right? So when there's this mass uprising, we're able to call it and go, no, we're not staying home anymore. We're getting out in these streets, right? We're able to push for people's budget, right? And talk about defunding the police in a real way, right? And it had to do with COVID as well as the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And here, we got to remember that people were killed here too, that we want to uplift those lives as well. So people like Fred Williams and others, right? And so we're trying to be a movement to meet the moment. In many ways we did. And I'm so grateful to all of the boots on the ground that met that moment and said George Floyd's name is going to mean something. Right. Breonna Taylor's name is going to mean something. We're going to make sure that these names mean something. Dejan Kazee can't just be killed for riding a bike in South Central LA, right? We're going to make sure that we rise up in his name. So that's happening. Patrice and I have an agreement that she would do the infrastructure work, which is not something, I have a whole nother job. This is not my job.
Yeah, you're
teach,
a professor. Yeah.
Right. So I've never taken a penny from Black Lives Matter. I was never paid. I've never been a paid consultant or paid staff member of Black Lives Matter. Right. And so the agreement was that Patrice would build infrastructure. I've run a 501c3 before. I didn't want to build a nonprofit. She would do that, right? And I would take advantage of the moment. I would, what Bobby Seale from the Black Panther Party calls seize the time, right? So let's work together as chapters to seize the time, because this is a moment when the world cracked wide open. We want to win some Black power. So that was the plan. And then, of course, all of the things that happen, that we are under attack. I get swatted, I get hit, all of these things. But I already told you where I'm from. That's not the first time I saw a gun, right? It's not the first time I've been threatened by police. And so my skin is really thick. And I thank God for that I stepped into this with thick skin. Those attacks hurt Patrice. And she wound up stepping back, and she writes about it and talks about it. So I feel like I can too, that she decided to step back. And what she did is put this guy, Shalomia Bowers, she hired him as a consultant. And so even though she had agreed that all the resources that had come in 2020, and we're talking tens of millions. I think the number they report is $90 million came in 2020 alone, that those resources were supposed to move over to my side of things, Black Lives Matter Grassroots. Even though she'd said that, Bowers had the keys to the castle. And he called me one day in 2022, because by then it's 2022, March 2022. He calls and he goes, I'm keeping all of this indefinitely. And that's what happened. This Black Zionist stole Black Lives Matter and then brought on this 2 other consultants. One is his high school best friend named Dejanay Parker, who was an aspiring Instagram model. If you've ever heard her speak, you know that she is not made for this. And then Cecily Gay, who was also a consultant, who herself filed personal bankruptcy at least 3 times. I think the most recent was in 2019. So I don't think she could get a job in retail sales, let alone be put in charge of hundreds of millions of dollars. So this is now who hijacked the platforms, the dollars, and the good name of Black Lives Matter.
That's a really great explanation. How do you see the relationship between your academic work and activism?
Well, I write about organizing, right? I teach a class called Race, Activism, and Emotions. And so I don't believe in ivory towers. I believe that the reason I teach Black studies, Pan-African studies specifically, is because we're a discipline that's founded out of movement and is here for the purposes of movement. So we're here to hone the intellectual tools necessary for revolution, rather than saying we want to resign ourselves to an ivory tower and engage in a life of the mind. We want to engage our intellectual tools for the liberation of our people, and that's what I'm committed to doing.
What can regular people, especially in this heightened time of racial awareness, individuals and people like, in communities do to create lasting change?
Yeah, so Kwame Ture, who's been brought up several times during this interview, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, wrote the book Black Power. Kwame Ture says, organize, organize, organize. And I think that's imperative in this movement moment, right? In a moment when we can either succumb to fascism, indisputable fascism, or we can fight. We have to organize. And that means find an organization that you like. It means more than just being active. We want you to be active. We want you to do what people are doing now, defending each other, keeping each other safe. And organizing also means more than that. Organizing means being strategic about, well, how do we fight ICE, but also fight LAPD and fight the California Highway Patrol and all of these other policing institutions? How do we make sure that people aren't criminalized on university campuses for standing up, right? So that's what organizing is. We would love to have people in BLM Grassroots. So our social media handles are BLM Grassroots on all social media, and we're blmgrassroots.org. But if we're not your get down, right, then it might be that you want to do work that's being courageously led by community movement builders to stop Cop City. And we're part of that circle, but that might be your get down more than ours, right? You might say, I want to contribute through the arts and I want to, think about how to use my platform. Well, join Build Power and the work that my little brother by another mother, Kendrick Sampson, is doing. So organize, organize, organize. Figure out who your people are and organize with them. We have to do that, and we have to commit our bodies. That means being on front lines. We have to commit our voices. That means lifting up what it is we want to say. We should still be saying free Palestine. Right. We should still be saying abolish ICE and abolish the police, and not be afraid to say Black Lives Matter, because Black lives still matter. And it also means your resources. So even though there were thieves who stole from, hundreds of millions of dollars, it doesn't mean that you divest from real movement. It just means you do your research and say, if I'm going to write a check, it's going to be to BLM Grassroots, not the thieves and frauds.
For sure. You mentioned Kwame Ture, and I can't help but think about like one of his most infamous quotes when he was asked the relationship of women in SNCC, and he said prone. And I think, you know, you being a womanist and as an activist, like, you know, obviously there's still chauvinism, you know, for women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I don't know if that was Kwame Ture who said that, but I know the quote you're referring to. And there are assaults on women, right? And I see with the rise of fascism, we have to also be very careful as Black people. And Angela Davis writes about this in Women, Race, and Class, that sometimes we try to mimic their gender roles. And we have to be very careful as Black people to remember that our freedom is bound up with each other, that Black people got free. You know, only Harriet Tubman's first husband was dumb enough to say, I'm not following Mama Harriet to freedom. Right. So, you know, that Black people have to accept each other and understand that we keep us safe and we guide each other to freedom. So this idea that as we see rising fascism, that Black men want to then mimic who white men are,
right?
You know, that's not going to get us free. That's not even going to get the Black men who want to assert themselves as, what do they call themselves? Alpha males, right? That's not going to even get them free, right? What gets us free is remembering that Black men, Black women, Black gender nonconforming people, all of our freedom is connected. And so don't be afraid of strong Black women. A strong Black woman raised you, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we're all strong. And again, womanism doesn't mean saying I want to step on men either. It means that men are my brothers, right? We're all siblings in the struggle for freedom. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What about like the time that we live in right now, where we have like this very xenophobic president who's getting away with DEI initiatives? He's basically enriching himself, like, you know, with his cryptocurrency, and potentially could start World War III. Like, you know, we live in a very scary time. Like, you know, what do you think about like the current administration?
I don't know that there's a lot to think about. I mean, the current administration is the devil. We got the devil in the White House, right? He's the devil. He's the devil, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes he very well is the description of the Antichrist.
Yeah, for sure. But also, there's all these people around him who are, you know, when you talk about Satan had his own, I won't call them angels, but, you know, had his own army, right? Hitler had a Gestapo.
Yeah.
So the question is, are we going to do the devil's work for him? Or are we going to say, no, this is what God commands of me? I'm a faithful person.
Yeah.
And God commands of us that we submit to no other God but God, right?
Sure,
no other God but God.
Yeah.
And so if the devil is directing us to strip brown mamas from their babies, that is the devil's work. We submit to nobody else but God. So we're not going to submit to a devil. If the devil is saying, you know, these people don't matter because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, we're not doing that work. People are God's children, right? People are God's children, and as God's servants, we have to advance the will of God, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned Hitler, and I was reading online, your grandfather was actually a communist and he opposed Hitler in Germany.
You were doing some digging. Yeah, so my father's father, who I was not close with, but I do appreciate the work that he did. So his name is Günther Reimann.
He's an economist. Yeah.
He was a famous economist. He wrote the book, The Vampire Economy. And the work that I know that he did. Again, we weren't close,
Right,
but
right.
so this
But that's still cool though to come
yeah,
from like, that kind of lineage.
yeah. Yeah. So his, I'm also often accused of being anti-Semitic because I'm Muslim, right? That Gunter Ryman was part of the resistance. His family was killed in the concentration camps. That's also part of my lineage.
Right.
And so it's important to remember that. And so I do appreciate that. I also appreciate that some of the conversations that I did have with him before he died is he was, there was a global resistance happening. And one of the people he was in community with, who he called my best friend, George. We had whole arguments about this, right? And I was like, who is your best friend, George? And then finally, when I was in college, he said, it was George Padmore. George Padmore, who is one of the fathers of Pan-Africanism,
Right.
was my biological grandfather's best friend.
Wow.
So he was part of not only the resistance in Germany, but the resistance around the world that included Pan-Africanism and the phenomenal work of George Padmore.
Yeah, that's really a rich legacy. And I think it's crazy that you're called anti-Semitic, considering I just saw you speak with rabbis, like is that from like, that criticism, is that coming from people on the right wing, or like who is calling you like, these outrageous names?
Well, I mean, if we had time to go down conspiracy realist holes, I would say what I think, say everything that I think, but I think that we can ground it in history. I'm an unapologetic revolutionary.
Right.
There has never been a Black revolutionary who hasn't been under the full weight of the state and of white supremacy. So they use 3 tools, right? They use tools that threaten your life. I've had that happen to me countless times now, right? With my life being threatened. They use threats of stealing your freedom, right? We have still have political prisoners, and we have them
most
in
definitely.
BLM Grassroots. I mean, we have our classic political prisoners. I'm grateful to also be the spirit daughter of a former political prisoner, of a few of them. So I call Baba Hank Jones of the San Francisco 8. He's my dad in every way but blood, right? But we also have contemporary political prisoners. So some of the phenomenal work that we've done in BLM Grassroots is freeing Brittany Martin, who was a political prisoner who was arrested in 2020, mother of, I think it was 7 children, and was wrestled away from her children. She was pregnant when she was arrested and sentenced to years in prison for simply demonstrating in Sumter, South Carolina, for George Floyd, right? So some of the best work we've done as BLM Grassroots is get Brittany Martin free, right? But we also have 2 BLM Grassroots prison chapters, both in California at Kern Valley State Prison and at Lancaster State Prison. So it's important to understand that the state tries to steal our freedom, but then the last thing that the state does and that white supremacy does is try to discredit people who are doing good work. And so when they say, Melina Abdullah, she must be anti-Semitic because her last name is Abdullah, or let's hit her with that. That's one of the things that they do to Black Muslims, everyone from, members of the Nation of Islam to, members who organize under, CARE, the coalition, what is it? The Council for American Islamic Relations, right? Or what they've done even to people who don't even practice Islam, like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, right? So these accusations are meant to discredit revolutionaries, and I humbly call myself a revolutionary.
Yeah, you most definitely are a revolutionary, and we live in a time now, like, in LA right now, the ICE protests have been going on, and just to see like, the way that the police have treated the protesters. And you've talked previously about, the police trying to squash your activism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's important. I'm going to say this, that there's a lot of misguided rhetoric about Black people having the luxury of sitting this one out. Black people, you cannot sit this one out. We cannot sit this one out We have to be 10 toes down in the struggle against this fascist police state. And this is for both moral and strategic reasons. That it's immoral for babies to be stripped from their parents, for spouses to be torn apart, from people to be torn from their communities. It is wrong. And Black people, we've always been the moral compass. We got to continue to be. We're not going to just be wrong because somebody wronged you at a job site. And I'm not saying that there aren't valid concerns and we don't have to have courageous conversations with our brown siblings, right? But this is wrong and we have to step up. But there's also strategic reasons which are quickly playing out, right? Which is that anytime you give more tools and resources to a police state that is founded based on slave catching,
right,
the number one target is going to be Black people.
For sure.
And when you see a Supreme Court that just undid birthright citizenship guarantees and is already deporting African Americans, and Trump has pledged to deport birthright citizens, including African Americans, we have to fight because our bodies are on the line too. So we have to be in the streets, and I've been in the streets. BLM Grassroots is in the streets. So that's really, really important. And I think that when we talk about the risks that come with it, we're already at risk. So you mentioned the swattings. A swatting is when the police claim someone else called them that elicited a violent response. The police claim that they came to my house and surrounded me and my children at gunpoint, not one, not two, but 3 times because somebody else called them. But we know that the police jumped at that opportunity. The police wanted to do that. Anytime we are challenging white supremacist patriarchal capitalism, that entire system, that entire power structure will descend on you and attempt to even steal your life. The thing is, your life is already at risk. Sure. I'm the mama of a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old boy who is now almost 6 feet tall, has broad shoulders and a deep voice, and has to walk down Crenshaw to get home from school. So our lives are already at risk. The only way to freedom is to fight for it. So we can't try to find a comfortable place in oppression. We can't try to cower in a corner somewhere. The way that we win our freedom is by fighting for it. And so that's my call to everybody. Look, y'all, we gotta fight. We gotta fight.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Melina Abdullah. I really appreciate you for coming in and talking to me. And that was enlightening. And you're an amazing orator. And I really enjoyed this interview.
Thank you so much for having me, Brother Ryan.
Most definitely.
All right.